All right, hello and welcome to another episode of Another Cool Rock Podcast. I'm your host, Steve Roth. One of the several goals I have in doing this podcast is to speak with musicians whose music really deserves to be heard by more people, as well as people I really admire, and this episode's guest definitely fits that bill. Colin Gawel is the co-founder, guitarist, and co-lead singer in one of my favorite bands of the last 30 years, Watershed. Musically, they are a gritty mix of power pop and your favorite down-to-earth rock and roll. Take Cheap Trick, the Kinks, Georgia Satellites, Bruce Springsteen. I know I'm forgetting a few others in there, just to name a few influences. Actually, take the name of their first release, the EP, released back in about 1994, 3 chords and a cloud of dust, and that might give you a clearer picture as to what they sound like. Real rock and roll with a battered Fender Telecaster and Marshall amps filled with great hooks, sing-along choruses, and lyrics that you can relate to that more often than not will remind you of someone or someplace that means a lot to you. Or simply just remind you that there's so much great rock and roll you've missed and you need to check out everything from Watershed. My own history with Colin and Watershed goes back to 1994 when I worked for Sony Music, and an advanced cassette of their debut epic release, the aforementioned 3 chords and a cloud of dust, came in the mail and I was hooked immediately. Fast forward to the following year and Sony moves me to Minneapolis, Minnesota for a new gig, a big promotion, and their first full-length album comes out on Epic called Twister. It turns out our office has a few other fanatics for Watershed. The band comes to town several times. In fact, the guys crashed in my house on more than one occasion, and we all were determined to do whatever we can to break this awesome band from Columbus, Ohio. Fast forward a few months into 1995, and despite all of our passion and local hard work, Epic drops Watershed. Call it a mix of label politics and economics. Regardless, I remember being really depressed. We all wanted the guys, Colin, along with Joe Ostrich on bass and Herb Schupp on drums, to just win. They deserved it. And you really couldn't meet a nicer bunch of guys who deserved to be huge. And even more so, that album Twister should have been the next step of a great artist development story for Epic and Sony. The band's work ethic and their music simply demanded it, deserved it, as mentioned before. That work ethic and the joy of making music together has kept them going ever since, going the full indie label DIY route, releasing multiple albums and EPs, all filled with stellar tunes. They truly have never released a disappointing album. And just last year, Watershed released their first album of new music since 2012, the very fine Blow It Up Before It Breaks, which instantly went into my power rotation. Couple that with Watershed coming to Minneapolis for the first time since the late 90s, and my musical year was complete. So it was a no-brainer to ask Colin if he'd join me here on Another Cool Rock Podcast. I really enjoyed talking with Colin, and I was reminded that he's one of my favorite people to conversate with, to talk about music, and not just because we both love Cheap Trick. We start with how Watershed got started. Basically, Colin and Herb and Joe formed the band in elementary school, and on to how, while the guys were all in college, they realized they had to make making music a full-time endeavor. The stories are great, along with the story of how they got signed to Epic Records, getting dropped, and how and why they've kept it going for 30 years. There's details on some upcoming shows. Those dates are in the show notes. And we even dip into Colin's solo music, the Pencil Storm blog, and of course, we talk about Cheap Trick. I hope you enjoy this episode. And more importantly, I hope you check out Watershed. I highly recommend the latest album, Blow It Up Before It Breaks, as well as The More It Hurts, The More It Works, and The 5th of July. Hell, all their music is great, really. You can find it all at your favorite digital places, Spotify, iTunes, Amazon Music, YouTube, and at watershedcentral.com. And also be sure to check out Colin's blog, Pencil Storm. All the details are in the show notes, and I want to thank you for checking out Another Cool Rock Podcast. It's been fun to see this little podcast grow an audience. And really, however big this little thing grows, or however small it might be, that's really just secondary to reaching any amount of people and turning you on to some music and artists you never might have discovered. As always, be good to yourself and be good to other people. Take care. All right, Colin, as I mentioned up at the top, wanted to kind of rewind a bit. If you could give the story on how you, Herb and Joe joined forces really and started the band. If I'm correct, it was back in high school, right?
Actually, elementary school. Like Joe had moved to town, and I was like fifth, sixth grade. We lived in Worthington, Ohio, which is the suburbs outside Columbus, Ohio. And I was into music, and we had a paper out. We shared a paper out together, and I got a guitar, and I learned some songs. Then we went and saw Cheap Trick play, and I was like to Joe, like, man, you gotta get a bass. We got to start a band. And then I found in middle school, my lab partner was this kid named Herb. He was super spastic. He was always like playing like this kid on this, basically on the table and stuff. It's like, hey, man, me and this guy, Joe, we're going to start a band. You should be in it. So Herb bought a drum set. So none of us really played instruments. And we just put our band together because we were just such big rock nerds. And that's basically when Watershed started. And then Biggie, Mike McDermott, who's known as Biggie, who's done all our artwork, been our tour manager all these years. We wanted him to sing in high school because we couldn't sing ourselves really. And he didn't want to do that. He was like too shy. So he just said, I'll just be like your background guy. So basically Joe, Herb, and I started Watershed. We were called The Wire back then. We didn't even know there was a band called Wire from England because, we lived in Columbus. There was no college radio. We just were like students of like classic rock. There was nothing hip here. And then we took our band. We started playing in high school. And then we went down to Ohio State with the idea of we're going to go to Ohio State together. But the plan was always to that was an excuse to keep our band going. Because back in those days, public schools were like cheap and anyone could get in. So we went down there and went to school, and then eventually decided just to do band full time and booked all our own gigs and bought a van and just toured around the country as old school as could be. Just friends love playing music.
That's amazing. So did it just evolve that way, or what was kind of the catalyst, if you will, that made it clear to you guys that, okay, chasing this dream is going to become a reality? Before you guys got signed, and we'll get into that. I mean, you guys had the total DIY work ethic, but at what point did you go, and have to tell the parents as well and say, this is what we're doing? What was kind of the catalyst?
I mean, it was problematic on that level because, here we go to college, right? And, I knew I was always probably going to do music on some degree, without, I think that's fair. The guys would agree. I was kind of a driving force. We'd practice every night. We work on these songs. We always rehearsed every night, like almost all the time from like ninth grade all the way through, even college. But Joe was a good student and I was an okay student. Herb and Biggie, not so much. But at one point, Biggie went out and started working on the road for a band called The Toll from Columbus, Ohio, around Geffen. And he came back and we were all roommates and we had, band gear in the basement and we were quote unquote going to college. But he was like, if we're going to do this, we have to do this now or else we're just going to talk ourselves out of it. And I thought that was ridiculous. I'm like, we should finish college. We're here. My parents are paying for this. Joe's a good student and whatever. But, at one point, randomly, I was driving somewhere with Mike and Racing on the Street by Bruce Springsteen was on. I wasn't even that big a Bruce fan at that time, but like, that line, some guys started living my little dying piece by piece came on. And just that quickly, I said, you know what? You're right. We have to drop out of school. So as a senior, we dropped out of school. We put a big map on our wall. We divided up the country into 4 sections. And we just started booking gigs. We would just call and book gigs. And, we'd always been, playing. And that was like, I'm not saying that one lyric, but I remember the moment when it went from being like, there's absolutely no way I'm going to just like, drop out of college and do this to like within 20 seconds later, I'm going to do this. And to Joe's credit, who's now a published writer, who's like a straight A student, an honor student, he said, yeah, you're right. Let's do this. So, it happened quickly. And then we just kind of, we didn't know any better. And we just, booked as many gigs as we could. We would just call and book gigs, figured the best thing we could do is just play as much as possible.
I'll tell you, it reminds me, and obviously, as far as it goes into what you've been doing as an adult with Colin's Coffee and stuff, but even long before you probably realized this, you guys, especially you had to be an entrepreneur. I mean, you're essentially starting a business, you're marketing it, to call gigs. I mean, how many people hung up on you and never got back to you? I mean, you're a salesperson that way.
Oh, well, when you love something, I mean, I'll give you a good example. And a lot of this, obviously, in Joe's book, wrote about this. But when we were like living in the dorms our freshman year, there was a thing like the Lantern, the local paper, which at that point I was a journalism major, but I didn't realize to be a journalism major, you have to actually show up every Friday and like write stories. And I, with rock and roll commitments, I couldn't do that, So I was like, but anyway, I was like, oh, they're doing a best band. So of course We rigged it. I was like, oh, that's free money. So we like put ballots everywhere in our dorm and everywhere. So we ended up, the Wire at the time ended up winning the most popular band by the Ohio State newspaper in front of the Ohio State marching band and like 3 bands that were on major labels, So, I mean, we just did it as fun. We just thought it was fun to promote. But like, yeah, at that point, that looked good in the press kit. Like, here's this band we've never heard of. It's just now voted the best band by the Ohio State paper. And that was definitely, I think we had a keg party and said, anyone come and like vote for us, we'll buy you beers. So, that's definitely, I guess you'd want to call it entrepreneurial spirit. And also, we just thought it was fun. We were always friends, so we just thought it was fun. We never took that stuff too seriously. But at the same time, hey, if you're going to have an open vote for who's the most popular band in Columbus, then we're going to come in there and try to get that thing,
That's so awesome. So it's the early 90s. You guys are becoming road warriors. You're out there. You're recording as well, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And you end up signing with Epic Records, which I'm sure was kind of the dream, given your love for Cheap Trick. I know for me, back in the 80s, starting with CBS Records, I mean, that was my dream. And heck, just to get to New York City, I knew the address by heart from looking at it on the back of Budokan all the time, So you got that dream, but how did that happen?
Well, like I said, you mentioned New York City, obviously that was a big dream to play CBGBs, and Biggie was in charge of that quote unquote gig. And we finally got in there. And I remember he said, I just got us a gig at CBGB's. And she just said to him, Louise said to him, you're just so damn, Mike, I don't really like your band, but you're just so damn polite. I'm going to find you something. That was like our first gig in New York City. And we were thinking about driving in there with no GPS as, 20-year-olds. And,
Right.
It's intimidating, right? So anyway, after that, we're doing, we're playing gigs and we're recording. We're always writing. We're always practicing. Like every night of the week, we were pretty much together. That was just kind of how we did it. We just always hung out together and did that. But at one point, we're sending out packages and this and that. And what you did back in the day, right? Just try to, get songs out there to everyone. And I remember the last minute, someone I went to high school with is dating someone who used to run sound for Kiss, I guess. I'll send a package. Because I remember at the time I was momentarily unemployed, because like every good musician, you have to have like service jobs with your stuff. But the restaurant I worked at, it closed unexpectedly. So I remember having some time. I'm like, well, this isn't exactly the Glengarry lead, but she's dating somebody who, ran sound for Kiss. So I send out a package, the old school press kit with the cassette and everything, and had the song "How Do You Feel" on there, like a demo. It gets out there, you don't hear anything because there's no internet, there's nothing going on. But eventually she passes it off to her boyfriend, Don, who ends up giving it to a friend of theirs, which his name's Charles, who happens to be Jim Steinman's limo driver, because Jim Steinman doesn't drive himself. He just drives around.
Jim Steinman of Bat Out of Hell.
Bat Out of Hell.
Wrote it all, produced it, right.
Exactly, like the legend Jim Steinman, right? So, and it turns out this woman, Amy, her boyfriend, Don, worked with Jim. So Charles likes our 3-song demo, I guess. I don't know. And he's playing it in like the limo as they're driving around. He's driving Jim to whatever. And finally Jim's like, who is this? He's like, Don, Amy's girlfriend, went to high school with these guys. And Jim's like, I really like it. It sounds like the Jim Blossoms with balls. So just because of that cassette being played, like this is like the crazy lucky side of the story, right? Jim Steinman gets interested and says, I kind of like this song. How do you feel? This is pretty good. But he sends it back up the channel. I mean, Jim's not going to fly to Columbus, Ohio. He gets the word going. People come out and see us. At this point, we're drawing, 600 or 700 people in Columbus. We're a real band. This isn't like totally some fake thing. It was like
it's not a hobby.
No. And like they came out and, basically check, like scouts come see you. Like, no, man, these guys are drawing a crowd. They're pretty good. So then after that, once Jim Steinman got on board, we cut some demos at the power station. And then, Danny and Don, his managers, and David Sonnenberg, these guys got on board. But really, Jim Steinman's the one who really believed in the songs. He just thought, you guys write good songs, and there's something here. So he really went to bat for us. And that was right when Bat Out of Hell 2 came out, which was also a huge hit. So it really came from that. But if we hadn't been touring, if we hadn't been a real band, if we hadn't been grounded in ourselves, if we hadn't played a lot of shows all over the country, and, that wouldn't have happened. So it's not like it was just some, random thing. It was random, but we had done the work to kind of justify it. So basically, we ended up doing a bunch of showcases in New York City. And, at that point, Epic Records wanted to sign us. And, Jim had brought Richard Griffiths, who was the president of Epic Records at the time, flew in on the Concorde just to see us with Jim Steinman, which is crazy. But we were just this bar band from Columbus. But, whatever. We had the songs and they liked it, and, we got signed. So it was an amazing experience. And it was really, obviously a special time in our lives,
Yeah. So 90, forgive me if I got the dates wrong, but I think it was 93 or 94, Three Chords in a Cloud of, Epic puts out Three Chords in a Cloud of Dust, the EP, which I'll get into this a little bit more at the time, but that's where I first discovered you on the East Coast, because I was a field rep for Sony. They would give us advance copies of things to bring to record stores, and they would do a sell sheet. And from the moment I literally within like the first couple bars, I'm like, oh shit, this is for me. This is exactly up my alley. This is where I lean, and loved you guys from the very start. Then following year, 95, this is a debut album, Twister. And that's where we all intersect, because at that point I had moved from the East Coast to the Midwest, and you gotta, I'll get into this a little bit more, but at the time with Sony, it was, everything was regionalized as a distribution company. So every region had, we had different regional offices, about 10 or 12 of them at the time. So I moved from the East Coast to Midwest out of the Chicago branch in Minneapolis, if that makes any sense. And I'm the new guy in the office, and I've immediately connect with some people. And it turns out, because we have so many records that they're putting out there, right? And hey, have you heard this band Watershed? Did you hear the new record that's coming out soon? And I literally, within it was about a month after I moved, a month before I moved to Minneapolis, about a month before the album came out. And we just found some like-minded folks within our little company there, within the office there. And I mean, I can just remember all of us just like completely buzzing about you guys, because we just thought, Twister it still holds up today. It's an amazing record. So get into that a little bit, but I want to talk a little bit about, what went down with Epic as well.
Well, first of all, it's very kind of you to say about Three Chords. That was kind of our manager at the time, David Sonnenberg. He was doing Spin Doctors and Fugees, and we're up there in this rare air. And we also knew we didn't have it made. Like, being from Columbus, Ohio, we'd seen a lot of bands a lot better than us, not like quote unquote sell a lot of records. So I don't think we ever like fell in love with ourselves in some unreasonable way. I would say it's like you want to get to the major leagues, and now you're on the bench and you're looking down at all these all-stars. So,
Right. Great analogy.
So it's just a different level. So they were like, you should do a live record, because you can tour behind it like the Spin Doctors. Let's just do it, and it won't matter. It won't matter. So, we did it, and maybe it could have been better. It could have been better. But, oh, don't worry, this is just a throwaway. Now, down the road, when our contract came up, they didn't treat it as a throwaway. They treated it as like we had 2 records that failed, whereas we didn't really want to do that one. But they were like, oh, this will be fun, because labels like to do what's worked before. And, obviously the Spin Doctors and Watershed, we're completely different bands. We're not a jam band. We're not like plugged into that scene, but whatever. So it went out, and, we always kept playing. We never stopped touring through this whole thing. Anyway, we ended up doing the album at the Power Station in New York City, which is a big deal. There was some drama behind the scenes. Our own manager, David Sonnenberg, who managed Jim Steinman as well, was like, you can't do this with Jim, because I love him, but you're a baby band. It'll be too expensive.
For him to produce you guys.
Yeah, and also he wanted to do it in the Power Station. We're talking like we're in the main room. We're a 3-piece band from Columbus, Ohio. That are like, young guys. And we're in there, and AC/DC and Keith Richards are walking around, and Cyndi Lauper, and, it's and Rick Rubin. It's unbelievable, right? But that's how Jim rolls. But, Jim was the guy who got us signed. So we felt like, we got to go with Jim. That would be disrespectful. And then our A&R guy was Frankie LaRocca. Rest in peace. Just the coolest A&R guy of all time. He played drums in the original David Johansen band. And when we first got signed to Epic Records, he gave us an advanced copy of Cheap Trick Budokan 2. He's the one who hooked us up with shows with Cheap Trick on his own, because he was a rock and roller. He was not a corporate. He was a true rock and roller. So we had this kind of interesting mix of like, we're at this giant studio in New York. Our A&R guy kind of sees us like Johnny Thunders. Jim Steinman sees us more like, power ballads, but it was an amazing experience. And the album, listening to it now, it's fine. I like it. I mean, I thought we did a really good job considering everything that was going on. Should it have cost that much money? Probably not. But you're juggling all these balls at the same time, trying to keep everybody happy. But it was still our record, and we knew that no matter what anyone's telling you, it's probably not going to be a huge hit, no matter what every record guy tells you. So we at least wanted to have something we could feel like was true to our spirit, and I feel like we accomplished that. And like I said, those songs to this day still hold up. Could we have done it differently, cheaper, done this or that? Sure, but you know what? It was an amazing experience, and we were surrounded by everyone was really supportive of us. So we don't have any of those major label nightmare stories of everyone was terrible. I mean, it didn't work out in the end, but we had a great experience, and to have that, get out there and have your record, and we would never have met you. There was no distribution, so just to even have your records out where people could hear them, that's like an amazing thing. I mean, that was impossible back then. It's hard to imagine the age of Spotify that just getting your record in a store, it was like putting a man on the moon, right? So it was a very interesting experience, and the record, it actually did pretty well. I think it was kind of picking up steam, and then other things went awry. But that happens in the big world, of big business, and it's not personal. I understand.
Yeah. So I mean, 99% of bands are on major labels are all gonna get ultimately that same phone call that there's not gonna be another record, that you quote unquote get dropped from the label. Did Epic ever give you a reason?
Yeah. I mean, just a lot was going on. I mean, I did not expect it, because at the time we got dropped, like "How Do You Feel" was like the number 2 song in Chicago. We were all set up.
I remember that.
Yeah. We were all set up to go on this summer tour. All these radio stations. We just played Columbus, Ohio, opening this big amphitheater, like 10,000 people. After we did this big Smithereens tour, which everyone said, "Oh, don't do that. You don't want to hang out with you guys are too hip for the Smithereens." Like, are you crazy? Like, I mean, that was the most fun of our life.
Audience for you too.
Oh yeah, of course, right? Like we were like, no, we're going out on the road with the Smithereens. You guys are nuts. So, but basically, our option had come up, and we didn't realize that the EP we did counted as our first record, and that was it. Because we were a baby band, and we felt confident we would take steps to get better. And I think behind Watershed, there was still a little bit of that era, like maybe these guys aren't going to kill it out of the gate, but there's something here. And to Epic's credit and Jim Simon's credit, there was something here. We kept going. We made better records. But, that was like when, and not to like blame anyone. Look, our record wasn't great. It didn't sell a ton of copies. That's all on us. So I'm not here to say, it starts with the band. Responsibilities with us to do a better job. And we weren't amazing. We were okay. We were a good little band, but we weren't great or anything. But, when Michael Jackson floated the big statue down the river for history, and I mean, they just started losing a lot of money. And when that happens at a big corporation, they got a cut. And we got cut, and Silverchair took our whole tour over like on a week's notice. We thought we were going to go out. They're like, "Oh, these guys are young, and they're like Nirvana, but they're 15." And, that's fine. That's the way, nothing against Silverchair, but it was that quick from like, here's what we're going to do to, you guys are done. But having said that, there's so many other bands that have had worse stories. And look, if someone had said, 2 years before, "Hey, here's the deal. You're going to be on a game show, and you're going to win a prize where you get to move to New York City, record an album, tour the Smithereens, put out 2 records. Your record's going to be in every store in the country. You're going to drive around, meet all these awesome people such as yourself, and come back home. And after 2 years, that's the end." That's pretty great. I mean, if you frame it that way, that's an amazing experience. So we always, I'm not saying it didn't hurt. It was brutal, especially in your hometown, to get dropped, because, you're, persona non grata then at that point, like nobody wants to touch you, but still it was an awesome experience.
I can tell you a couple things. I learned a real valuable lesson. I was pretty young then. I learned a valuable lesson just a few years into my record business career, and that was try not to get too emotionally invested in the bands, because I mean, we were just so passionate for you guys and loved you guys dearly as friends. I mean, hell, man, you and I used to stay up late watching every Cheap Trick bootleg I had, when you come to Minneapolis, but
you broke out stuff I never seen, those interviews in Japan. I can still remember it. And like,
Yeah.
and then I never had Kiss and Sell, the first book. I was like on your floor. I'm like, I got to read this whole thing tonight because I think I stayed up all night trying to read it. And no, I mean, and that's part of it too. We kind of had a Midwestern sensibility, which was probably lost in New York City, but we really obviously connected in Minneapolis because, we just have whatever was going on there. And Chicago, those were kind of more areas, but we never could really pull off the rock star vibe that maybe was necessary in LA or New York. They want you to dress like, your rock stars all the time. And Simon said, hey man, all the time. But like, it just felt fake to us. And maybe we just didn't have what it took. Like not on stage. We were always fine playing, but like hobnobbing, you know what I mean? We never could really show up and like wear like Space Hog, those guys would be the nines with, they wear like dark sunglasses inside.
I was just gonna say, I never saw you guys ever wear sunglasses inside.
No, we just couldn't. We were just friends from kids. We just never could do that. So that was probably why we connected with folks out in the hinterlands, as it were, more than we did like in the big markets. So as far as business guys, you know what I mean.
When I look back on that, and I can say this now with hindsight and a lot of experience, especially when in that system, to become a regional priority, let's say, right, and to kind of get that flame started was really tough because there was just so many albums and so many different bands, and then there's unforeseen forces like Michael Jackson, like you mentioned, and other albums, other bands, because somebody else might champion within the company. And I always figured that it's really hard for a band to become like a big priority for a label, but it's even harder to stay that priority over the course of a couple records and to find those champions. And pardon the soliloquy, but what often the problem was that if the label had a big national priorities and you weren't from a big city, sometimes you can get, if you weren't from Boston or New York or LA or Chicago even, sometimes it was really tough to kind of get your head above the water there, even when there was champions within the company, like our little office, let's say in Chicago, and having that, some airplay that theoretically should break out, but maybe 6-8 weeks later, there's a new Pearl Jam single coming. Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, I wasn't part of that side per se, but being around it, you're trying to make sense of all of it, as a band, and you're just, you're touring and playing all those things, but a lot of things have to go right. And
right.
It wasn't tough, but like the reason we even got the airplay in Chicago was through our connections. Like we got that and they started playing, that reacted. So it did really well. Like it was like Lightning Strikes and How Do You Feel were like the number 1 and 2 songs in Chicago. So we felt like, oh, okay, there's something going on here. But at the same time, we weren't really anyone's darling back on the other sides and, whatever. So that's just, that's the nature of the music business. And once again, it wasn't like you came and people saw Watershed and were like, this is a slam dunk. I mean, we were not, we were a younger band. We were rough around the edges. We were a fun little rock and roll band, but, we probably, got, there's bands that have deserved more than we got in that time for sure. So we never felt like, it was the right amount, and we're happy where we're at now. So it probably was the right amount of everything, I trust all that. And, we didn't stop after that. It was a great experience.
No,
but,
yeah. And that's what I wanted to get to actually, because I mean, you mentioned before, you guys were always very level headed about it. And I can remember always getting that vibe from you guys back then. And so after that, you go the full indie route. And if my count is correct, 5 other studio albums, a live album, a singles compilation record. I mean, that's more music and releases than a lot of bands put out in the same time span. And personally, I mean, I love that you guys kept at it and kept making music. I mean, in the midst of all that, all you guys built lives. I mean, you had families and, built careers. I mean, you mentioned Joe wrote a book. You've got a business. So what was the main reason or driver that you guys have kept it going, really?
I mean, I think you'd say friendship, but it was so ingrained in our personality to rehearse all the time. It was so part of our lives that we always felt like we were getting better. Like, Star Vehicle, Frank Aversa, who we did not pick to produce Twister, called us up when we got dropped, God love them. And you talk about things you can't control at the label. When we got signed, we were brought to you from the geniuses that brought you the Spin Doctors, Frankie LaRocca, David Sonnenberg. that second album comes out, and I'm sure you remember this. It was like a historical bomb. Like it was on the cover of Rolling Stone as like the Spin Doctors, like Cleopatra Cat and all that stuff. You know,
Oh man,
it,
absolutely. That was, I mean, historic bomb. And if you
historic.
worked in the office then and you sold to these big companies that bought a whole ton and within 30 days they
Yeah.
wanted to return this. And you know that yeah, I'm
So
gonna have
we were next on the
flashbacks.
runway. We went from being brought to you from the guys, awesome, to these guys. So and that had nothing to do with us, but that's the way it goes, right? You're the next guy from that brain trust. So everybody was like, oh, we got to get away from these guys. But Frank Aversa, who had produced that album, whoever, he invited us up. We did Star Vehicle. And I think Star Vehicle is underrated because I think a lot of bands, when you work that hard and get the rug pulled out from under you, it's easy to like pull away or get bitter. But we were friends and we still really liked just playing music together. So, we did that. And then we opened for the Insane Clown Posse, which is a historically horrible opening spot. Like I don't think people can appreciate to this day. They'll say, oh, there's bad, but no one would take the gig at all. And we took it because we had nothing else going on, and Star Vehicle had just come out and we knew mutual people. So we go out there every night and just get, everything thrown at us by juggalos. I mean, it's not even a rap act. They couldn't get anyone to open for them because they were just breaking big, but their set was like an hour. So they're playing like a 3,000 seat place. They got to have something else.
Right.
So we were like, well, either I wait tables in Columbus, Ohio, and Joe's working at a shelter workshop and Herb's working in a restaurant, or we go open for the Insane Clown Posse. So we did that for like 30 shows. And it was rough. I mean, everyone hated us every night, but the clowns are cool and they appreciated that we were doing it. And we, it was kind of like all we had. So I wouldn't wish it on anyone per se, but people go through really serious problems in life. If your only problem is for 30 minutes a day, a bunch of kids are going to yell at you. It's not really that big a problem. You know what I mean?
And throw Fago at you. Right?
Yeah. And at the end, we get out there and throw some Fago too. But then after that, Herb decided to leave the band, and that was devastating because we were together. But you know what? We found a different drummer, Dave, who was amazing. And then we found a new producer, Tim Paddlin, who really believed in the band. And then we really made our best records. So when getting roundabout away, what kept us going is we were always still excited about the music. We never felt like when you're a late bloomer, we always felt like we were always writing, and Joe and I both write, and we were always rehearsing. We always felt good about the next song. So, it wasn't like we ever ran out of steam musically or creatively. We were always feeling good about things, probably delusionally, but that's just what we did. And we were also friends. So our friendship was before we were in a band. So it wasn't like we were just a bunch of hired guns and everyone split. Like it's never crossed our mind to ever stop. No one's ever broached that subject, even to this day. It's just how, what can we do? We love doing it so much. And, we always seem to have good songs that we want to work on. And if not, we just play Cheap Trick songs. So, you know what I mean? It's always fun.
You guys, when you want to be and need to be, have been an amazing Cheap Trick cover band. But you mentioned Star Vehicle for a minute and you said underrated, and it's always about the music, right? I mean,
Yep.
You guys just have a plethora of great songs, and I routinely pull out any number of your records at any time and go, of course, Black Concert T-shirt, Super Stressed. I can't tell you how much I love Give a Little Bit off Star Vehicle. And then you just keep going on. I mean, the more it hurts, the more it works. I mean, each of those records to me, I could feel and hear the evolution. You guys stay true to yourselves, but there was definitely an evolution in your sound with Tim, I think, producing. Those records all sound amazing.
Absolutely.
And it just, they always never fail to get me going. I mean, that's why I've been so thankful and so happy that you guys have kept going because, all right, well, the last record was great. What's this one going to be like? And that's a perfect segue into the latest album, the new album you released last year, Blow It Up Before It Breaks. First album of new material since 2012. There was a long stretch between albums. So how did the album eventually come together?
Well, we've done singles for sure. We're always recording. That's kind of the secret sauce in Watershed is like, even though if we're not out there, we never stop. Like, Joe eventually, moved off. He's written like 5 books now, but like he's always, I'm always playing music. I play in bands here, whether it's the League Bowlers or my own thing. And Herb, we're all, there's never been like, hey, everyone's going to take 10 years off and we're going to get back together. Like,
right.
So we've always been like working on songs, always doing things. Even put out a song here or there. It just, it was more problematic to get everything together with the more recent record. But we got it done eventually. And also we don't have a deadline, so we never have. So until we feel like we've got it pretty good, there's no hurry to put it out. But really, we're always thinking about music. We're always playing, even when, if Joe's home, he doesn't live here anymore, but he's home. We rehearse all the time, and we'll work on songs. And same thing with, I'm always playing solo, and Herb was in the band for a long time, and Dave. So the nucleus of the band's always playing, very active. And then Joe does other things, but we never felt like, we've lost the thread. It's always the first thing on our minds, even if life, like as bands go on and life goes on. Like I said, my son's now got an internship up in Chicago, and Joe's got kids, and I have the coffee shop in Pennsylvania. So we're all doing our thing, but it's never been on the back burner. It's always, how can we pull this off? How can we do this? So the most recent record we'd worked on for a long time, we had a guy named Mike Landolt in Columbus, Ohio, which I did all my solo stuff on. We did brick and mortar with, and Mike's an amazing engineer. He moved out here from out west because his wife worked for Abercrombie, but he worked like at Sound City. So we started doing records here, but then he ended up moving. So then we had all these tracks, and we just thought, let's take these up to Tim Paddleton, because we had done the EP up there with him, with Herb, Joe, and I. This is probably pretty boring. I apologize for this. No. But after all this time, we basically went to Tim, and Tim was like, Tim's a very brilliant and very, he has passionate thoughts about music. So we kind of had to tear things down to the studs and start over. But eventually we got it done, and we felt great about it. I mean, really great about it. I mean, just to be playing music with your friends at this point and still putting things out, that's the number one thing. So, we felt, okay, we can put this record out and feel good about it. So, it was a labor of love and a lot of traveling back and forth, but it's still a band record. It's still us playing. It's still really from the heart,
You kind of I think you kind of answered my question there. And I was going to ask, when you guys are recording a new record, it's all of you guys in a room together, right? It's not emailing tracks back and forth to build an album like Def Leppard or something like that, right?
No. With us, I mean, there's a certain amount of like, does Joe have to fly in some background vocals or something? But for the actual, when we're actually deciding what songs are going to be played, we have to be in the room together. We have to lay things down together. Now, as we're putting icing on the cake down the road, but it all starts from a very organic spot of an actual rock band playing in the room together. And it's funny, when Blow It Up came out, we had to play these songs live. But I was like, you know what? I know this is going to work, because I know at some point we played these songs and we decide what songs we're going to record based on what sounds good in the room. So no matter what magic Tim puts on that, everything, starts with us playing in a room together, feeling like a band. And if it doesn't get out of there, it's not going to get recorded. So there's no like, hey, here's an email, Herb add drums, Joe add bass. It has to be vetted through us playing it together in a room live together before we take it any further.
Got it. So here's a question I've always wanted to ask you guys. 2 lead vocalists, both you and Joe, historically. I've never actually counted who's sung more or anything like that, but there's always been that great flow on each record. You've got these songs. I'm sorry, Joe's got these songs. Yeah. I mean, how do you guys decide on that? Or is it basically kind of who brought in the idea, who wrote it, or is it a collaborative thing? Or
Well, it's nice. First of all, it's nice you say that, because, of course, when Epic Records signs, it's like, it's so awesome they have 2 lead singers. And then when you're in drop, it's like, this is horrible. They have no Eddie Vedder. You know what I mean? Because it is weird. I mean, who has 2 lead singers, right? So, right. But at the time, neither one of us wanted to sing. So, like, well, I'm not singing because we were kids. Like, I'm singing, you're singing. Typically, whoever brings in the idea sings it. Now, that's not hard and fast. There are times where, if it sounds a little better for one voice or the other, that has happened too. But more often than not, if someone brings the general idea in, they're singing it, it probably sounds better in their voice. But there have been times like, I know I want to sing Over Too Soon, but like Joe is like, that's like more his idea. But I was like, oh, that's such a good one to sing. And, Anniversary, I sang some Can't Be Myself, wrote together, but it's more of a Joe vocal. And,
Sure.
Generally speaking, it's pretty much whoever brings it in. There's not usually, it's not like Kiss where there's a fight over God of Thunder, like when Paul wrote God of Thunder.
Right.
Bob's like, it's Gene's tune.
Right.
But we definitely, but once again, everything in Watershed is done as a band where we bring it in and play it together that's kind of our old school way of doing it. So it tends to just fall into one guy's wheelhouse or the other.
Couple other questions about Watershed in particular, and everything I know. Everything is available on all the streaming services, right? I know the Epic stuff is up there. I mean,
Finally.
I'll have links in the show notes, but yeah, for a while there, it wasn't up there, right?
Oh man, all those majors, man, they didn't put their stuff out. It's funny because we did a couple albums with your but Irv Carwalis,
Sure.
Irv, sort of
Idol Records, yeah.
He had a great quote. He's like, I'm like, man, how come? Like, because when iTunes was going, Watershed was probably at our prime. Like Can't Be Myself was getting played in the Midwest. Our songs were getting played at Ohio Stadium football games, and meanwhile, Epic Records Twisters not available on iTunes. It's like all it takes is an intern to download it, right?
That's it.
99 cents a track. We're out touring all year. It's not available. And Irv said they don't seem to understand the math of you can have one song sell 1 million copies, or if you have 1 million songs, if they all sell one, it's the same money.
Right,
so
right.
It gives you some insight in the major labels. They were so lazy, they wouldn't even put up albums they'd already paid for and make them available. So anyway, that's a little side story of that. What was the question again? I'm sorry.
No, well, I was going to segue into another question, but my ADD kicked in a bit. But I was always wondering, do you have a guesstimate on how many shows you guys have done?
Biggie would know. I mean, obviously it's slowed down in recent years. We do more, but probably I think we've done close to 1,000 or something. Mike keeps really. Biggie's a real
he's the archivist, guy. Right?
Yeah, yeah, he keeps everything.
That's amazing.
I don't keep anything. So, he's got all that, but yeah, for a long time, that's all, that's what we did. And, obviously, love to do it. And, to get up last time, and you really helped us get in the Minneapolis gig. We really wanted to get up there and play, but, we enjoy being together and the fun and the music and all that stuff. So, on a different world, we would do it more, but, you get what you get, and you got to be thankful for that. So, that's how we look at it. Is anytime we get together to play, it's really special.
All right. Speaking of playing live shows, you have some upcoming dates, correct?
We do. The first one's pretty neat. Now, it won't be much outside of Columbus, but there's a big festival here called ComFest, and it's like it's the biggest like non-corporate festival in the country. It goes on every year. And growing up, we would go see bands like Willie Phoenix, RC Mob, and I'm like, wow, this happens in our hometown. So when we finally got to play ComFest, as Watershed, and we've done it through the years, and I've done it solo. But this year they reached out to us when Watershed want to play ComFest. So we're going to play Friday night downtown on this big stage. And then also Willie Phoenix, who's our hero, who Joe writes about in Hitless Wonder, who we helped get a street name. He's like our guy. He's going to play right before us. I'm going to play guitar with Willie. So that's just like, for a kid in Columbus, Ohio, that'd be like, oh, I'm going to, jam with Rick Nielsen and then play with my band. You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's really cool. And then we're playing, the only show we had planned was we're going to play Natalie's, is a place in Columbus, Ohio, August 15th, a full headlining show, do the whole thing. And Dave and Herb both play both these shows, which is fun. Now we have both drummers.
Yeah.
Fun.
You guys did that in Minneapolis last year. That was very cool.
Yeah. No one wants to miss the fun, right?
Right.
So we're going to play that. And in theory, we're going to drive up to Michigan and try to start working on some new songs. So that's our plan, is to go up to the
wow.
So we use that as kind of our, hey, let's get together, we'll play a show, and then let's go up and we'll go visit Tim and see what's happening. So yeah, we got the ComFest June 27th in Columbus, Ohio, and that's like a big outdoor downtown thing. And then we're doing Natalie's in August, and then outside of that, I'll be playing my solo stuff and different gigs, but no other Watershed other than that for now.
I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up your solo stuff, because shame on me, I kind of forgot that you had some amazing solo stuff out there, and I found it, and I was immediately reminded how that song, your song Superior, just crushes me. That song is so fucking amazing. Those lyrics, man, I can't tell you how many times I've heard that song. And that whole what is it, podcast, there's a bunch of other songs on there. I don't know, was that a full album? It's all on Spotify. But
yeah, it did go
my God, man.
And I wrapped them all together and just made it tidy. But no, I really appreciate that. And, that was when Joe went off to write books. I was like, well, I guess I'm going to have to do something. So I got the solo thing together. And, it was a big change because, Watershed's what I've done my whole life. But, I always keep playing. So I feel like good about that chapter and what got done. And, it's all there if anyone wants to listen to it. And I appreciate the kind words about Superior. And I'll admit, that's a high watermark. That's a good one. And it was, I thought, I think it brings the band pride to see Joe, like, out writing books about, Watershed or Ryan Adams or whatever he's done. And also, that I can do a solo project and not embarrass everybody. So that, right. So I feel, good about those songs and I still play them live I play Superior, and when I play solo, I play it every single time, every single time.
Wow.
So.
Yeah. Just, man, I'm telling you, puts a lump in my throat and makes the hair on my arm stand up at the same time. It's just an amazing tune.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much. And also, just backstory on that, we were playing Upfront and Company up in northern Michigan, and Watershed would play up there. We played 2 nights, and I know we used to usually see you guys, and we drive around and drive up there and drive all the way up there. And I remember like talking to someone, and a woman, she was talking about her kids and this and that. And then I remember we had to drive all the way from the UP to South by Southwest, and it was like -10.
Oh.
And a whole line of like 6 hours south of Milwaukee, I remember that just blew my mind that anything could be 6 hours north of Milwaukee. So,
right. Yeah.
So like that, and then we got to South by Southwest. Are you guys healthy? Like, oh man, we just drove here from the UP, but like Superior was written basically around that experience of just being up in northern Michigan. I mean, it's not like note for note, but like those are things from Watershed, like taking note as you're traveling around the country.
It's crazy, right? 6 hours north of Milwaukee, and you're still not in Canada.
You drove all day, and we're like, oh my God, we're only to Milwaukee. So we had to drive all the way to Austin because Watershed, we were crazy for our long drives. Like,
you guys, say you guys were road warriors is the understatement of the year.
Yeah, in a van. I mean,
right.
Original 3 Chords Cloud, they actually did the math, how many miles we averaged between gigs. Like we would drive all the way to Upfront and we drive all the way up to Uptown just for nothing to see you guys and drive like back. We did it all the time. But yeah, Superior, your husband lives 6 hours south outside Milwaukee. I always remember that. Like, man, we're really far north. So anyway, little insight into Superior, not that anyone needs it, but that those kind of experiences come from like always thinking about songs and taking little notes and, trying to, just we're all music fans, right? So you just want to be in touch with it.
Right on. All right. Other endeavors. You got the blog Pencil Storm, which I think I was a little late to the game. I can't remember how I found it. I think maybe I found it via you on Facebook or someone about 3 or 4 years ago. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, of course this is awesome. I mean, there's something there for like all the things I dig. There's going to be a little bit of sports. There's a ton of music. Of course, there's going to be Cheap Trick stuff there. I think one of the first things I saw on there, and I think you had emailed it to me way back when, but that original big Cheap Trick ranking, which probably brought everybody up to maybe, what was it, Woke Up With a Monster or something, and just hilarious. But Pencil Storm, man, there's always something interesting and cool to read there.
No, I appreciate it. Well, part of it is promoting a coffee shop. I always had free time, and I always like to write. So I had my own blog, and Watershed, we always had websites. But it was like, hey, let's do something we can open up to more people. So it's just a labor of love. And obviously, it lends itself to folks of like-minded like you and I, where it's just like deep dives into like, Kiss solo records. And yeah, the Cheap Trick song rankings, the first time I ever handed it off, like, I mean, Bunny read, they put it on their website. Like it was,
that's right.
My wife was like, what are you working on? I'm like, I'm going to rank every Cheap Trick song. And as you see, it's long. It's like a master's. It's a total work of just like,
yeah.
I think it goes all the way up to, oh God, maybe it goes to 90, past that. It goes up to Special One, I think.
I think you might be right. Yeah.
Yeah. Because but that's Pencil Storm. And it's just a way to organize things where they're not just online on Facebook, where you can just have some fun with it and write and, keep that creative spark going. And we have a bunch of different, writers. You're always welcome to write. You would fit right in there, Steve. Like, it's just a fun little, like, we can't actually meet at a bar anymore. So it's kind of like our way to meet online at a bar.
Sure.
Well, crazy rock theories.
I might take you up on that offer for sure. So, and speaking of Cheap Trick, I meant to bring this up before. You guys finally got a Cheap Trick song on record with a cover of Reach Out on the last record on Blow It Up Before It Breaks. You guys were doing what was it called? Was it Why Isn't Cheap Trick in the Hall of Fame? That was the name of the cover band.
I started called Why Isn't Cheap Trick in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? And it always bothered me. I said, one day we're going to do this. So the band's called Why Isn't Cheap Trick in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? And we would play the day of the nomination in Columbus and Cleveland. And that we do it for free. And the show was always free. But the club had to put out Why Isn't Cheap Trick in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? And then we was like, we're just trying to answer this question. And it was really a lot of fun. And it stirred up some traction. And the last time Watershed played with I think, yeah, Cheap Trick. I think I saw him before they're in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and Rick was like, "What's this all about?" And they thought they got a big kick out of it because they're too humble to do anything like that themselves.
Right, right.
And then the actual when they got in, they played up in Cleveland, and we have some mutual friends, and someone like backstage just brought us in there, and obviously we had nothing to do with it, but they're such good dudes. They're the nicest guys. We met them at a young age. Like bands like that and the Smithereens, when you meet your heroes and they're cool, it really goes a long way.
Yeah.
They were always so kind to us. And, we know them. We used to wait out by the back of the Newport and give them our tapes and stuff. And we got signed Epic. Rick was like, called us down. We were playing Indianapolis with them and BTO. And he was like, wow, you guys actually got signed. Like these kids are actually on Epic Records,
Right.
They've always been looking out for us, but they got a kick out of that. But yeah, that was a fun project to do. And it got a lot of press. It was easy for people to write about, why is he in the Hall of Fame? But obviously, they deserved to be in there a long time before that. But we just had fun, making the case.
You're right about them being humble, and I was just reminded too that in that original Big Cheap Trick ranking, you pepper in there some great anecdotes of when you met them, meeting Robin, and just outside, during sound check or something, asking him, asking him, are you bummed that you're back playing clubs again? I mean, that stuff is always what you wrote in that ranking. So many of those things just really stuck with me.
Oh, true. I remember that because Robin, we were out there by they're playing the Newport in Columbus, Ohio. And this is before Lap of Luxury. And we're just kids. And Tom was back. And I was like, does it bother you? You used to be like the biggest band. And I'm like, I can't believe I sucked up and said it. Robin was, he's like, nah, man, for one summer, we got to be the biggest band in the world. I mean, who gets to do that? Now all the pressure's off. Like, it's just like an amazing answer, like off the top of his head.
Right.
And then we, last time we played with him, we were down in Myrtle Beach when Joe was there. And, they comes up to the dressing room on his own, knocks on the door. How's it going? Like, we don't know Robin Zander that well. And like our manager at the time, Thomas O'Keefe, who like works with Weezer and Train, he was like, do you know how unusual it is? The lead singer of a band would come up out of his way to say hello to guys they're opening one night. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Cheap Trick have always been kind like that. They've always just been friendly and nice. And like when we played our hometown opening for them, they all came out with us. And that's how you learn how to behave. I'd like to think, right? If a lot of bands are probably, you were in the industry. That's pretty atypical from what I hear.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Very atypical.
Yeah.
So I mean, it makes you want to love your guys. I love them anyway, but they've always been just such cool, down to earth dudes.
Always. Yeah. No, totally. And I also wanted to ask you as well, how many Cheap Trick songs do you guys have in your repertoire now? Or have you done?
Because of why isn't Cheap Trick in Rock Hall of Fame? But that's kind of a hodgepodge. But it's funny because the last record, Blood Before It Breaks, the record was done, but it was an odd number of songs. I'm like, you know what? Something feels wrong. It was already mastered. It was ready to come out. I said, we have to add one more song just to make it 12. And I'm like, we should do a Cheap Trick song. We've never done one. When we were at Epic Records, there was going to be a Cheap Trick tribute that came out. We were going to do Downed, but then we got squeezed and did Stiff Competition. Kenny Aronoff played on it, by the way, tambourine. But the whole album got scrapped. This is nerdy Cheap Trick stuff. So we just decided on Reach Out because we never felt like the electric version of Reach Out had ever gotten done. But just adding that 1 3-minute song delayed that album by like 18 months. That's what it took. Because we had to go back up and record, and Tim's kind of eccentric, and then the whole thing disappeared. But we felt like we had to have that song on there. But I would say off the top of our head, we're probably prepared to do 15 or 20 Cheap Trick songs at any moment.
God, just amazing. And they're always killer. And Reach Out in particular, I love that version. One, it's definitely inspired. I mean, an obscure soundtrack song, really. I mean, I can think of Enough's Enough did a cover of Everything Works If You Let It.
Yeah.
And probably as many like partial Cheap Trick fans might have, if you're of a certain age, that song, probably Reach Out because you may have had the heavy metal soundtrack. But, definitely an inspired choice. And you guys kind of slowed it down a little bit, but a little bit, but it works.
It's a little more groovy. And then also, because, the Trick Fest show, obviously it's written by Pete Comita, which is, interesting. We're picking that song. But, the electric version they do at Chicago Fest, that had never been recorded. So we don't have keyboards. When they play it live, Rick plays the guitar. So we thought, we didn't put that much thought into it, but we thought it'd be cool to record the electric version the way Cheap Trick plays it with no keyboards. You know what I mean? So
right. Yeah, that stood out to me right away too. It's like, oh, this rocks a little harder, but it has a groove.
Yeah. So, but you leave us alone every show, we're good for some Cheap Trick usually. So
Awesome, man. Well, Colin, thank you for the time, man. Is there anything else? I'm happy to pimp whatever you got. Always got something going on, and I'm thrilled that Watershed is still kicking it there, and I'm thrilled for your success with the coffee shop and everything. It's just awesome to see people that you really love doing great things.
Well, dude, right back at you. And, the way you like your online presence and the way you fight the good fight and stuff. And I'm with, like I said, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to know you. It's really one of the things that, makes all this, it's all great anyway, but, like I said, at any time, I mean, I just appreciate you, us being friends all these years. I know we're friends. I know we'd hit off every game, spend all night hanging around talking about whatever we got to talk about, and we'd have a great time.
Absolutely.
It's like all the right things in music, right? And all the right things about art and stuff is like bringing people together, like-minded, and we're having fun. Not that things are always fun, but at the end of the day, these connections in rock and roll, they're special little connections that, you know what I mean? That the people that don't outside of it probably don't understand it. And I get that. But when you're part of it, it's really special,
Yeah. I mean, you and I are the same ilk. I mean, we're passionate about this stuff. We love talking about this stuff. I mean, that's my joke with this podcast. It's like, well, there's probably nothing else I love talking about more than music, you know? And I don't have a lot of people to talk to about it anymore, So outside of calling you and maybe just a couple other people, I mean, I'm going to talk to bands and people that I haven't met before, because I just love talking about how people create and their passion and just all the ins and outs about it, and kind of behind the curtain, so to speak.
No, it's great. Said, down the road, if you're ever doing a topic on Cheap Trick, you want extra guy to weigh in or something, let me know. I'm always game for, like, I love those kind, those kind of fun talks. You know what I mean? So, whatever's out there.
Will do, man. Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
No, really, I'm flattered. Thanks, Stephen. Thanks again, man. We never could have got that show in Minneapolis together. And that was like the only reason we even wanted to play. It was like, we have to go to Minneapolis. So the fact that we found that place and played that night and got us, it meant so much to us. We really want to be up there and see everybody and play. And, who knows, maybe we'll be back sometime now that we have something there. But even that moment, like I said, I can't tell you, that was the only place we wanted to play. And we just wanted to get to Minneapolis because you guys were so good to us, and we felt like we had such good friends up there. And that was really, really special for us. So
it meant a lot to us. It was beyond a pleasure seeing you guys for the first time. And good Lord, since 28 years, maybe something like that. So
it was
worth the wait.
We played Minneapolis 19 times. And that was our 20th show. And it had been like 20 years. It's crazy.
Amazing.
All right, man. Well, hey, let's stay in touch. Let's, we make it. If you want to talk rock and roll, we can just talk anytime. Let me know, and I'm around. Even on the podcast, if stay in touch.
Will do, man. Thanks.
All right.